The wind howled through the skeletal branches of the old oak, its gnarled limbs clawing at the sky like the fingers of a desperate man. 5 years ago, this tree had been a silent witness to an act of cruelty that stained the earth beneath it. Elias Kane, a man with a heart as cold as the frost that clung to the grass that winter morning, had tied his loyal hound, Sable, and her 6 newborn pups to its trunk. The rope was coarse, biting into their fur, and the knots were tight, unyielding. Elias had stood there for a moment, his breath clouding in the frigid air, his eyes empty of remorse. Then, with a grunt, he turned, climbed into his rusted pickup, and drove off, the gravel crunching under his tires until the sound faded into the vast, indifferent wilderness. Sable, a black and tan mutt with soulful amber eyes, had whimpered, her body pressed against the rough bark, shielding her pups from the biting wind. The pups, barely a week old, squirmed blindly, their tiny bodies shivering in the cold. The forest, dense and ancient, stretched endlessly around them, a labyrinth of pine and shadow that swallowed their cries. No one came. The nearest town, Blackthorn, was miles away, a forgotten speck on the map where folks kept to themselves and strangers were met with suspicion. Days bled into nights, and the rope held fast. Sable's strength waned, her milk drying up as hunger gnawed at her. The pups' cries grew weaker, then silent. The forest watched, impassive, as life slipped away. But the story didn't end there. The oak, ancient and wise, stood at the edge of a place locals called the Hollow, a stretch of woods where compasses spun uselessly and the air felt heavier, as if the earth itself held its breath. Old-timers whispered of spirits in the hollow, of things that moved unseen, but Elias had scoffed at such tales. He'd chosen this spot for its isolation, not its myths. Yet something stirred that winter. The ground beneath the oak, soaked with Sable's blood from her struggles against the rope, shimmered faintly under the moonlight, unnoticed by human eyes. The hollow was awake. 5 years later, the oak still stood, its bark scarred where the rope had bitten into it. The forest had reclaimed the scene. Moss blanketed the ground, and vines curled around the trunk like possessive fingers. Blackthorn had changed little, its streets still lined with sagging porches and faded signs. Elias Kane was long gone, rumored to have drifted south, chasing work or fleeing debts. No one spoke of Sable or her pups. They were just another tragedy swallowed by the wilderness. But the Hollow hadn't forgotten. Clara Wren, a botanist with a penchant for the obscure, arrived in Blackthorn that spring. Her hair was a wild tangle of auburn, her eyes sharp with curiosity. She'd come to study the flora of the hollow, drawn by reports of strange plants that bloomed only under moonlight. The locals warned her to stay away, their voices low, their gazes skittering to the ground. "That place ain't right," said Old Man Carver, his hands trembling as he poured her coffee at the diner. "Things go in, don't always come out." Clara smiled, polite but undeterred. She'd faced worse than superstition. Deserts that burned her skin, jungles that tried to swallow her whole. The hollow was just another puzzle. Her first night in the woods, Clara set up camp near the oak, unaware of its history. The air was thick, the silence unnatural, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. She noticed the tree immediately, its massive trunk, its branches twisting like veins against the sky. Kneeling at its base, she traced the scars in the bark, her fingers lingering on the faint grooves where the rope had been. Her flashlight caught something else, a patch of earth where no grass grew, where the soil shimmered like liquid silver under the moon. She frowned, scraping a sample into a vial. It wasn't just dirt, it was warm, almost pulsing. That night, as Clara slept in her tent, she dreamed of a dog with amber eyes, its fur matted with blood, its gaze pleading. She woke with a start, her heart pounding, the air in the tent heavy with the scent of wet fur. Outside, the forest was silent, but the oak loomed larger in the darkness, its silhouette almost watchful. She shook off the unease, chalking it up to fatigue, but the dream lingered. Days turned into weeks. Clara catalogued plants unknown to any textbook. Flowers that glowed faintly, their petals curling inward at dawn. Vines that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. The hollow was alive in ways she couldn't explain, and the oak was its heart. She found herself returning to it daily, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name. One evening, as she sketched the tree, a low growl broke the silence. She froze, her pencil hovering over the page. The sound came again, deeper, from the shadows beyond the oak. Her hand went to the knife at her belt, but the growl wasn't threatening. It was mournful, almost human. Stepping cautiously, Clara followed the sound. The underbrush parted to reveal a clearing she hadn't seen before, though she'd mapped every inch of this area. In its center stood a dog. Not just any dog, but one with black and tan fur and amber eyes that pierced the dusk. It was impossibly familiar, like the ghost of her dream. Around it, 6 smaller shapes moved, their forms indistinct, like shadows given life. Clara's breath caught. The dog tilted its head, its gaze locking onto hers, and for a moment, she felt the weight of 5 years of pain, of betrayal, of survival. The dog turned and vanished into the trees, the smaller shapes following. Clara stumbled after them, her flashlight beam dancing wildly. The forest seemed to shift, branches bending to guide her deeper into the hollow. She emerged into another clearing, this one dominated by a circle of stones, each etched with symbols that pulsed faintly, like heartbeats. At the center, the ground was bare, shimmering like the patch beneath the oak. The dog stood there, its pups, if that's what they were, circling it. But they weren't pups anymore. They were too large, their forms too fluid, their eyes too bright. Clara's skin prickled. These weren't animals. They were something else. As she stepped closer, the air grew heavy, pressing against her chest. The dog's eyes never left hers, and in them, she saw not just pain but purpose. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the shimmering soil began to rise, forming shapes, limbs, faces, fragments of memory. Clara staggered back, her mind racing. The hollow wasn't just a place. It was a keeper of debts, a weaver of fates. And it had been waiting for her. The hollow pulsed with a life Clara couldn't comprehend, its air thick with whispers that weren't quite sound. The dog, Sable, she knew now, though she couldn't say how, stood at the center of the stone circle, her amber eyes burning with an intelligence that transcended flesh. The 6 shapes around her, no longer pups but something otherworldly, moved with a grace that defied nature. Their forms flickered, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, their fur shimmering like the soil beneath the oak. Clara's heart hammered, her scientist's mind grappling with the impossible. The symbols on the stones glowed brighter, their light casting shadows that danced like memories across the clearing. She took a step forward, her boots sinking into the shimmering earth. It was warm, alive, and it tugged at her, as if urging her to listen. Sable's gaze held her unyielding, and in that moment Clara saw flashes, Elias tying the rope, his face twisted with indifference. Sable's desperate struggles, her pup's fading cries, the oak standing sentinel as the hollow absorbed their pain. The visions weren't just images. They were emotions, raw and searing, flooding Clara's senses until she gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Why am I here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The dog tilted its head, and the air rippled. One of the pups, or whatever it had become, approached, its form coalescing into a shape almost canine, but its eyes were too human, too knowing. It dropped something at her feet. A piece of rope, frayed and weathered, stained with blood long dried. Clara knelt, her fingers trembling as she touched it. The hollow hummed, and she understood. This wasn't just a place of vengeance. It was a place of reckoning. Days blurred as Clara returned to the clearing, drawn by a compulsion she couldn't shake. She stopped cataloging plants, her notebooks forgotten. The hollow had claimed her, just as it had claimed Sable. She learned its rhythms. The way the stones glowed brighter at midnight, the way the air grew heavy when she spoke Sable's name. The dog and her brood were always there, watching, guiding. They led her to hidden places. A spring that glowed like liquid starlight. A grove where trees whispered in a language she almost understood. Each discovery deepened the bond between her and the hollow, but it also deepened her fear. The forest was changing her, weaving her into its story. One night, under a moon so full it seemed to press against the sky, Clara found a new vision in the clearing. The shimmering soil rose, forming a figure. A man, broad-shouldered, with eyes like coal. Elias. His image flickered, and Clara saw him as he was now. Older, weathered, living in a dusty trailer far south. His nights haunted by dreams he couldn't name. The hollow hadn't forgotten him either. Sable growled, low and guttural, and the pups circled, their forms sharpening into something predatory. Clara's breath caught. "You want him," she said, not a question. The dog's eyes burned brighter, and the ground trembled again, the symbols on the stones flaring like beacons. Clara should have been terrified, but she wasn't. She felt the hollow's pull, its justice. Elias had left Sable and her pups to die, but the forest had other plans. It had kept them, transformed them, made them its own. And now it needed Clara to finish what had begun. She didn't question how she knew what to do. The hollow spoke in ways beyond words, its will seeping into her bones. She packed her gear, left Blackthorn without a word, and drove south, the rope from the clearing tucked into her bag like a talisman. Finding Elias was easier than she expected. The hollow guided her, a whisper in her mind pointing her to a sun-bleached town where the air smelled of diesel and despair. Elias lived on the edge, his trailer sagging under the weight of neglect. He was thinner now, his face lined with years of hard living, but his eyes were the same, cold, empty. Clara watched him from a distance, her heart a storm of anger and purpose. The hollow's presence followed her, a shadow that made dogs howl and birds fall silent. She approached at dusk, knocking on his door. Elias opened it, squinting at her, suspicion etched into his features. "Who are you?" he growled, his voice rough with whiskey. Clara didn't answer. She held up the rope, and his face paled, recognition flickering in his eyes. "You remember," she said, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. Before he could speak, the air shifted, heavy and electric. Sable appeared behind her, not as a vision but real, her fur gleaming, her pups at her side. Elias staggered back, his mouth opening in a silent scream. The hollow didn't need Clara to act. The ground beneath the trailer shimmered, just as it had under the oak. Vines erupted from the earth, curling around Elias's ankles, his wrists, pulling him down. Sable's growl filled the air, and the pups lunged, their forms blurring into something ancient, unstoppable. Clara watched, frozen, as the hollow claimed its due. Elias's screams faded, swallowed by the earth, and the trailer stood empty, the vines retreating as if they'd never been. When Clara returned to Blackthorn, the oak was different. The scars on its bark were gone, replaced by smooth, vibrant wood. The shimmering soil was just earth now, soft and fertile, sprouting new life. Sable and her pups were nowhere to be seen, but Clara felt them in the rustle of leaves, the warmth of the sun. The hollow was at peace, its debt settled. Clara packed her things and left, her notebook still blank. Some stories, she knew, weren't meant to be written. Years later, travelers passing through Blackthorn spoke of a dog with amber eyes, seen fleetingly at the edge of the hollow, always alone but never lonely. The oak stood taller, its branches heavy with leaves, and the forest kept its secrets, waiting for the next soul to wander too close.